Hello and welcome to my channel. Today we're going to talk about the Mandela Effect, the Will of Mandela, and how many states do you remember? How were the stars on the flag? Were there 50 stars? Were they lined up in order, kind of parallel? Or were the stars offset? Were there 7 stars and then 6 stars offset and then 7 and then 6 until there were 52? Or was the flag is as it is now? Do you know how the flag is now? If you remember 52 states, then what are the other 2 states? Read through the name of the 50 states when you get a chance to see if those were all the states that you remember, or even if some of those are different than you remember. Was Philadephia a city or a state? Was Chicago a state? Was Boston a state? Was Denver a state? Was Baltimore a state? What about Minnesota? Was it a state as it is now, or just a definition of Dakota? Was Franklin a state? Do you remember the teacher saying there were 50 states plus Alaska and Hawaii to make 52? Or do you remember her choosing the number 48 states plus Alaska and Hawaii to make a total of 50 states? Do you remember as a child learning how many states there were and having other students in the classroom seem to have trouble learning it, and there being a disagreement at the time on whether there were 50 states or 52, and you were wondering how so many of them could think it was different than what you knew was the truth? Perhaps that learning experience is not about who's right or who is wrong, but learning to accept different opinions and not having to be right, and accepting that you may be wrong and that you no longer need to debate to prove your point is the correct one, and you can just let it go. One of the songs that Peter, Paul, and Mary sang, the great Mandela, the Will of Life. Mandela is a Sanskrit word meaning circle or round. In a religious or spiritual context, it is a symmetrical representation of the universe. And the song, it sounds like they mention Nelson Mandela going on a hunger strike and dying, but then again, this song was written before the date that many people even remember him dying, even though it does mention him dying in the same way that many people had thought that he had died. In a spiritual or religious process, a Mandela is a period of approximately 40 days in which time the human system completes one physiological cycle. That kind of reminds me of the 40 days and 40 nights with the Noah's Ark thing. This talks about the Mandela wheel, and it says only in the human realm, with its constant fluctuation of pleasure and pain, can the Dharma be clearly heard and liberation attained. In the outer ring are 12 links of the chain of dependence arising clockwise from the top. They are ignorance, action, consciousness, name and form, sources, contact, feeling, craving, grasping, becoming, rebirth, old age and death, an old person walking with a cane. Without inner peace, outer peace is impossible. If we first establish peace within our minds by training in spiritual paths, outer peace will come naturally, but if we do not, world peace will never be achieved. The rule of thumb is to guard your mind. Don't let it go astray. To prevent it happening, we need to cultivate mindfulness. Alternately, we can concentrate on something that calms the mind, such as peace of beautiful music or the very act of breathing, which is interesting because now let's step into the irony of it all, where we feel like we may be losing our minds, or what some people call the Mandela Effect. So let's take a look at possible states that you might have remembered to be the other 2 states. Philadephia, where the U.S. Constitution was drafted in 1787, served as the nation's capital for 1 decade in the 1790s. Is it possible maybe you thought that Philadephia was a state? Or how about Chicago? A lot of people thought Chicago was a state. On June 26, 1925, Chicagoans were talking secession. They said maybe it was time the city broke off from the rest of Illinois and formed a new state, which I think is very interesting. And and even in 2016, there were two scholars and they thought that they wanted to create a new United States and that Chicago should be a state. And then there's Baltimore. Baltimore was also once the capital for a time. British troops closed in on Philadephia at the end of 1776. The Continental Congress decided to abandon the city and flee south to a safer haven of Baltimore. So maybe in your mind, Baltimore was once a state. The Star Spangled Banner, the Star Spangled Banner was originally penned in Baltimore. Did you know that? And look how close Baltimore is to Washington, D.C. It's only 29 miles. Also, did you know that Baltimore was the site of first blood spill during the Civil War? 4 soldiers were killed and 36 were wounded, with more than a dozen civilians killed. They called it the Pratt Street Riot. And then there's Boston, called the city-state, because it was called the city-state in New England before it became part of the United States. And maybe you remember Boston as being a state. And Minnesota, which is interesting because it comes from the Dakota and it means clear blue water or cloudy water. And maybe in your mind, Minnesota wasn't even one of the states. Who knows? I'm fascinated to know what are the other 2 states that you remember being as states. Please let me know in the comments. Oh, and as a side note, my hubby thought that Sydney was the capital of Australia and was shocked to find out it was a place that he had never heard of. And I've heard a lot of other people who thought that Sydney was the capital of Australia. So please let me know in the comments. And as a closing, blessed are the peacemakers. Are you a peacemaker? A peacemaker is someone who realizes that it is not about who is right or who is wrong. They understand that we should not stop to scroll through a post about someone we disagree with, hoping the post makes them look stupid so that we can share it. This would not promote peace at all. A peacemaker understands that it is not about who is right or who is wrong, for we are all wrong if we cannot communicate without arguing. I hope you enjoyed my video, and thank you so much for tuning into my channel. Bye-bye.